Obviously, if human gene editing were ever to move to clinical reproductive applications, safety would be very important. And indeed, that is what the entire scientific community, including the scientists behind this study, are saying, that we need much more examination of safety and possible side effects before we are ready to put this into clinical application. As far as safety concerns with this study, the very fact that it was aimed at research, it was not ever intended for clinical application, I think means that we don't have those safety concerns. And I mean, as far as causing mutations, what the technique is actually aimed at is repairing mutations. We do also need to think of the risks of not doing something. So if and when we understand this technique well enough to be able to predict what it will do accurately and to say, well, that is fairly safe, we also need to think, if we're using this technique to cure genetic disease, actually if we don't do it, that's extremely unsafe. That's a risk, that's a potential harm.
When people say we have to be wary of scientists playing God, what would you argue?
The playing God argument to me is really a concern about what I call improper agency, whether this is something that we as humans should be doing, should we have this sort of power. And I think it requires us to confront the idea that we need to take responsibility for what we do in the world. We also need to think how, in a pluralistic society where there are different religious views, how we engage in this debate. And certainly it shouldn't be that any one voice should predominate.
Let's look at the society which has produced this particular research, China. Are there ethical concerns about the way China goes about its research that don't apply perhaps to other countries?
No, look, I think in fact what we need to be wary of is what I call scientific chauvinism. We in the UK have excellent standards for scientific governance, ethics and regulation, but we need to be wary of assuming that other countries don't necessarily have those standards. China has a bit of a reputation as a wild east, you might say, that really is not necessarily deserved. If you look at this paper, it's very clear that ethical approval was obtained. They do have systems of oversight and regulation. So I think we need to be careful of assuming that just because something's taken place outside the UK or in China that it's ethically dubious.